Welcome back to The Ripple Effect, where we dive into the stories shaping our world, exploring their origins and the ripples they send across global politics, trade, and more. And today we woke up to just a whole host of headlines following Trump's inauguration. He seriously signed a lot of executive orders, a historic high. But for this episode, our third, with my colleague, Nick, we are turning to President Trump's inaugural address, where he reiterated his bold intentions to acquire the Panama Canal and rename it the Gulf of Mexico. Ideas he certainly floated before, but now he appears very determined to act on them. The Panama Canal is one of the most critical choke points in global trade, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, with approximately 6% of global trade passing through there annually. This raises a lot of immediate questions. So, Nicholas, what is the crux of the issue?
Well, I think there are a few things in play here. The first is that the rhetoric in the past has been that there's been issues with the Panama Canal. We're going to retake this, and in the outright inaugural address, commitment was made to do so. And subsequent to that, Panama started to respond with a series of inquiries and studies regarding companies involved in the operation of various parts of the Panama Canal. And so one of those specifically is CK Hutchison. It's a very old Hong Kong-based conglomerate that's involved in the operation of critical infrastructure across several countries, Latin America, North America, Europe, mainland China, Southeast Asia, and very much a global company, right? And so I think that when Trump specifically says we gave the Panama Canal, so the history there, yeah, the U.S. built the Panama Canal, completed in 1914. And the process to hand it back to Panama began in the late 70s. It was completed in 1999. Panama then, at their expense, subsequently expanded the canal in 2016. And so, the sovereignty has been there for just over 25 years. There's been material investment in the canal and its related ancillary infrastructure by the Panamanian government. To that point, and where really the crux of the issue begins, in the late 90s, CK Hutchinson won a tender to operate the and have the significant investment in, not own. Bear in mind, they don't own this; they operate it under a
Okay.
concession. And so these two entry points, as mentioned, Pacific and Atlantic, are operated by this company. And so when Trump is saying this is operated by China, what he's referring to is that there are two Hong Kong-based companies that operate critical entry points on either side of the canal. That after the national security, the changes in Hong Kong could fall very easily under the purview of the Chinese Communist Party. And so this is really the crux of the issue and why there is so much attention being drawn to this at this point. And in response to the rhetoric yesterday, there was this inquiry, the initiation of the inquiry, so to say, by Panama into CK Hutchison, the nature of their operations, and trying to prove that they have no history of being hostile to any host government where they operate a concession. And so that's really how this issue has originated and how it's been brought to the forefront under the guise of China operating the canal.
Okay, interesting. And does that fall under Hutchison Ports then?
Yeah, so Hutchison Ports is a specific subsidiary that is engaged in this activity in the Panama Canal transit jurisdiction.
Right. Okay. And fairly global then, as a company operating ports all over the world, I think in 26 countries.
And no history of being hostile to any of these host governments. And really the company itself, the predecessor has been around since the 1850s, controlled by the Li Ka-shing the empire, and really a business empire. And it's a very interesting situation now that we've diverged quite significantly from historical posturing. Um, One of the bigger challenges here, and you really look at this in two parts, is one, when the canal was given back, and where the ripple effect really begins from a defense perspective, is around, there is a perpetual preferred treatment criteria associated with the treaty that governed the handover of the canal that provides for U.S. naval and associated military transit in the event that that is required, demanded, or deemed necessary at any juncture. And so the ripple effect here is that, from a defense perspective, what Trump is saying is that we have the two critical points of the canal that comprise most of the volume going through the canal being operated by a Hong Kong company that could fall under the purview of Chinese influence. And, in the event that China were to use that as dual use infrastructure, commercial and military, there are significant implications as to U.S. security and broader Latin American security for those countries that have the alignment with China, or are wholly reliant on U.S. Defense for bilateral security guarantees. And so, that's the defense angle. I think it's really quite complicated because, for where we are at present, this has not been a big focal point from a defense perspective because, the U.S. right now is engaged in supporting many activities that are quite far from the Panama Canal. So I think a lot of people are arguing that this is really a commercial issue, not a military issue.
Right. Okay. But I mean, could control over a strategic choke point like the Panama Canal be leveraged against adversaries reliant on the canal for military operations and trade?
And this is it's a very astute point, because I think that that's where this becomes a highly complex circumstance, because if you look at, so the concession slash the concession that grants CK Hutchison slash Hutchison Ports the ability to operate these areas was brought up in 2021, and was renewed without a tender, and the reason for that was due to the stated lack of interest from global parties, specifically U.S. companies, in engaging in that tender. And I think that, if you look at Latin America and the importance of the canal and the economic situation at present, so take the last time Trump was in office, right? So what the one of the biggest choke points of the tariff and trade dispute was around agricultural commodities, where Latin America is a pivotal region, and a lot of the supply that was traditionally coming from the U.S. being exported to China was replaced by exports from Brazil and other countries in Latin America that are heavy on agricultural commodities. And so, with the Panama Canal being a critical choke point for transit of these commodities, and to that follow-on point, Latin America for a long time has been reliant on Chinese foreign direct investment for critical infrastructure and to grow the base of real assets from which to discern services economy and other parts of their development, right? And so the U.S. has been absent from that table for quite some time, and that's created really a big change in influence. And I think that what you've seen is a lot of countries in Latin America. I mean, Brazil is, one of the key constituents of the BRICS framework to get away from the U.S. dollar. They've hedged themselves, right? They have a good relationship with the U.S., maybe reliant on the U.S. for security guarantees, and that's what Donald Trump has brought to the forefront. But they're relying on China for foreign direct investment. And it's interesting. The critical transit, irreplaceable transit corridor for a lot of this is the Panama Canal, and that extends to Chile with critical minerals, and other parts of Latin America. And so I think that the challenge you have here is that, if you take the view from the people who this is impacting, not from a U.S. perspective, but from the on the ground Latin America perspective, if I'm saying I have a transit corridor that is critical to my economy that's going to change hands,
Mhm.
and the party which is going to be in control of that has not been a substantial participant in investing in my economy, and the party that is departing or shifting position, so to say, not assuming that this power dynamic exists, is going to pull back, right? I would be requesting significant assurances that some kind of investment is going to continue, and there's going to be a coordinated effort for enhanced economic exports slash investments from the U.S. to Latin America, because right now China's filled that void and gained the influence subsequent via that comes with doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I have covered the whole critical minerals and supply chain. Chile being the world's largest copper producer, exports a lot, significant quantity to Asia, particularly China. So any disruption or preferential treatment in the canal could really impact shipping costs, delays, redirect supply chains, etc. And Brazil being a producer of rare earth elements, Peru also exporting copper and zinc. They're going to face similar challenges on top of agriculture. There's a lot there.
Yeah, and I think that what this really comes down to, is the US and China are going to have to figure out the world is too interconnected for them to fully decouple. And so what has to happen here is as Trump took office yesterday, that some type of reset framework or floor has to be placed underneath the tension. And this will be one of the first real case studies of how the US thinks about this in the advent of critical infrastructure that is associated with economic aims and military aims. And I think that, because if you take the other side of the coin here, if I'm China, I'm saying you have a substantial security presence in my backyard. We do not have a substantial security presence in your backyard outside of a Hong Kong-based company that's come here. And not taking a position on this, but I think that to a certain degree, the US has to figure out there's not the case for China repurposing any type of company to serve military aims in this, vis-a-vis this Hong Kong, the change in security. But we don't know what that looks like on a projected basis if this rivalry intensifies. So I think that the concern is not unwarranted. The issue is that the implementation on the back end of this is going to be really critical because the US is not set up, nor has it done in a long time, these kind of state investment interventions to this degree that are non-military, right? Because what we're really talking about here, is a commercial thoroughfare with military implications that if it continues in its current fashion, hopefully will be able to continue being a critical transit corridor for Latin America as it receives more investment to scale up agriculture. I mean, a big part of this too is you think about not just China, the US, but also places like the Middle East that rely or increasing the trade. The EU just did their Mercosur trade deal to increase trade with Latin America. And so, it's increasingly becoming the a global raw materials superpower. And, this is a critical juncture. What happens at the canal for these nations and jurisdictions. So I think that a lot of the world is watching how this is going to be handled, and this is going to be a rhetoric that comes from the administration and is then implemented by private industry in the form of enhanced FDI, or if this is an outright state intervention issue, because that kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's both the defense side and the economics. A lot to keep our eyes on and follow the ripple effect of this one.
Yeah, and I think that the what we'll see here over the next few weeks is really going to be, if there's going to be an American territorial expansion, how is this going to be implemented, and who is going to ensure that some kind of economic ties, whether it's the case of Panama here and serving as a critical economic pathway for Latin America, or for Greenland in becoming a resource superpower and benefiting the people of Greenland if those resources do come out of the ground or are found to be economically extractable. what that framework looks like is the world is watching.
The world is watching.